Good morning. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you for joining as we strive to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, this morning, we are going to talk about a video that I was watching last night on Jeffery Tavares' Neck We Talk podcast, right? That is found on YouTube. And I think Jeffery Tavares and the Will Rattigans, Reason with Rattigan, are two podcasts that I would encourage people to watch. But at the same time, I think that the discussions that we're having on these podcasts tend to be narrow and to have a visceral approach to solving our problems, with problems that afflict modern Jamaica. I say that to say because I think sometimes we tend to look at the United States as the measuring stick, the exemplar of democracy and the rule of law. And if you look carefully, they are not really the, the measuring stick or the standard of what we should consider as rule of law and order. They are just not, or the rule of law, as I just intimated. Now, let's look carefully at this article. Let me share with you because I want to begin my discussion. This article that was written in the ABC newspaper online, right? ABC News Online, I beg your pardon. And it says here, this was written on December 5, 2023. So this was a fairly recent article. It says a year before the presidential election, 3/4 of Americans, that's 76%, believe the country is headed in the wrong direction, and the leading Democratic and Republican candidates are viewed broadly unfavorably, according to a new ABC News Ipsos poll. Only 23% of Americans think the country is headed in the right direction. Now, Jeffery Tavares' program last night was asking that question: is Jamaica headed in the right direction? And we know that that is an open secret, that Jamaica is not headed in the right direction. And we can cry that it is as a result of the high levels of corruption that we see on the island. Republicans are overwhelmingly negative, with 95% thinking things in this country are heading in the wrong direction, followed by 76% of independents and 54% of Democrats, according to the poll. So that is where we are, that even in the United States, right? Even in the United States, the large majority of the populace believe that the United States is not headed in the right direction. And the United States is considered, is touted to be the exemplar of democracy in the world. And that is what Wilfred Rattigan and Jeffery Tavares, who reside there, by the way, they believe that the United States is the example and is what is the standard of what the rule of law ought to be. But the United States isn't, sadly speaking. The United States says that verbally, but oftentimes it does not practice what it preaches. And I think that, Wilfred Rattigan should understand that. And I think that the conversation about the solutions to Jamaican problems need to be elevated. And we need to be able to put into proper context the global issues and trends and events that are occurring in the world. We cannot just think that Jamaica is this independent country and Andrew Holness and his and the opposition leaders and administrations are just merely, left to rule us and to lead the country independent of global forces, because we know that that is not true. And Wilfred Rattigan is a former FBI agent, should understand that. If he doesn't understand that, I would be surprised, because he himself has said that he has traveled worldwide on behalf of the FBI. And I would like to ask him, how is the FBI viewed by the American populace? Do Americans view the FBI from this very, do they view the FBI as being an institution, an organization that is transparent, right? And that is held to account for things that it has done? Is the FBI a transparent and an accountable institution? And what do Americans think? That is the question I'd like to ask Wilfred Rattigan, because sometimes we think, and Jamaicans down there believe, that Wilfred Rattigan, through his association with the FBI, right, is going to solve the problems that afflict modern Jamaica. And I'm telling you that he can't and will not be able to do so, because the forces of globalization are much more stronger than Wilfred Rattigan is, or Andrew Holness is, or Dr. Nigel Clark is. And the Jamaicans have to understand that, and they have not yet understood it, and neither, I should hasten to say, do they want to understand it. Because we are living in a world where people tend to embrace ignorance. We love ignorance, and anything that flows with the wind, that the wind blows, we just run with the current. Because we love to follow the crowd and to jump on the bandwagon. That is what we're all about. And I'm sure that Wilfred Rattigan and Jeffery Tavares have good intentions, and they have great, ideals for the country of where they would like to see Jamaica go and what they would like to see Jamaica achieve. I am sure, I'm not questioning their motive. But what I'm saying is that they need to elevate the level of conversation that they're having about the problems that afflict modern Jamaica. Because you have too many followers who are just following and they don't understand, they don't read. And oftentimes I make comments in the message box, during their live, and people are just saying to me, stay in your lane, as if I don't understand what's going on in the world. Because to them, Rattigan is going to be the solution to our problems. Just by the mere fact that he was a former FBI agent, right? And I would not like to read the history of the FBI. And people need to understand that the FBI also was included in the deportation of Marcus Mosiah Garvey back to Jamaica. Had it not been for the works of the FBI, perhaps Marcus Garvey would not have been deported to Jamaica. So I do not see where we believe that the FBI is going to solve our problems of corruption in Jamaica. Right? We need to be able to elevate our conversation and to be able to contextualize the global occurrences and the global forces with which or with whom we have to contend. And we have not yet done that. And everybody's repeating the same thing. One of the things about, our world now and globalization, everybody dresses the same, everybody speaks the same way, everybody eats the same food, everybody listens to the same music, everybody wants the same national heroes. What is happening to humanity? What is happening to our brains if we all want to do the same thing? Everybody wants to take the same medicines. Nobody wants to be different and to think different and to think independently. We all want leaders, right, who are going to salvage us from our problems miraculously, as if they're not human beings like yourselves. And this is the problem. People, the crowd rushing, and they're doing the same things, and they're not even realizing that they're being deceived. But let's look at another poll or another article about citing US corruption here. And this is coming from The Hill, right? And this was written on, wow, I think I might have, yeah. Most US adults say country is heading in wrong direction. That's a poll. And this was written on, it seems on October 14th, 2023. So also not very long, not very old article, I should say. Most US adults say the country is heading in the wrong direction, according to a recent survey from the Associated Press NORC Research Center. The poll, released Saturday, found 78% of respondents saying the country is headed in the wrong direction. Only 21% said it is headed in the right direction. Right? So this is what is happening in America also. Americans, the majority, believe that the country is not headed in the right direction. And I dare Rattigan and Tavares to also check the polls of other countries. You're going to see whether it's in Great Britain or it's in Germany or it's in Spain, the citizens of the world believe that their countries are not headed in the right direction. Now, we should be asking ourselves, why? And we should be asking ourselves also a very specific question: is globalization working for the world's population? Or should we go back to the tenets, the fundamental tenets of sovereignty? But we're not asking those questions because it's working for me in my personal life. I think it should be working for everybody. Or it might be working for the US because the US heads the global world and its economic activities. Then it should work for all countries. But it does not work that way. Right? A method that the teacher might use for a particular child is not going to be a method that perhaps is applicable to another child. The other child might learn totally different, and the teacher might need to craft a different methodology to be able to be effective with that other student. But we tend to think that one economic model fits all countries. And this whole quest of globalization, which has destroyed the economies of many countries in the world. And I dare you guys to go and read the book by Chalmers Johnson, The Sorrow of Empire, referring to the American Empire. And go and read chapter 9 of that book. And you'll see what the whole process of globalization, the havoc that it has wrought on many of the global populace and the economies of the world. It has upended, destroyed the economies of the world. And when economies are destroyed, we know that there are the social factors and other, important, factors that glue the countries together are going to be upended. We're going to have, crime and violence, right? We're going to have lots of migration, and the best of the best, the most skilled workers and intellectual people are going to leave that country. And Jamaica is just one of the victims, of the many victims of globalization. And we're not talking about that. All we're talking about is, can Andrew Holders, can Mark Golding fix the problems, the many problems that afflict modern Jamaica? And I would say, no, they can't, right? Can Rattigan and any other person fix the problems? No. I think the problems that we're facing, right, are global in nature. And these problems have to be fixed globally as well as domestically, right? Jamaica does not have any control over IMF stipulations. They don't. They lied to us in 2012. Was it 2012, 2013 when they inked out a deal with the IMF, stating that we are in control. The IMF is just there to supervise us, and we decide what we can work with and the austerity that we can accept. And that was a blatant lie, because we know that the IMF is not going to give Jamaica any autonomy. Do you think that really a politician would be talking about applying 7.5 primary surplus to its economy, having absolutely no money to take care of people's health and education and just to build basic infrastructure in that country? That is what they called the bitter medicine. And it seems to me that we are still in that bitter medicine. Talking about the IMF, let's look at I just wanted to show you here a report by Statista, Statista.com. Let me share that with you, just to give you a proper perspective of what is happening in Jamaica and the United States as regards their national debt, right? So let me see, right? So this is Jamaica's national debt, right? So we have Jamaica national debt in relation to gross, all right, or gross domestic product. That's the GDP from 2018 to 2028, all right? So let's look at that. So we're seeing here that I hate when they have it here, like on my phone, I had it in vertical. It's now in the horizontal. I have to make it bigger. Okay, so we have, and I'm not seeing beneath here, but we have in 2018, right, we were at 94.39% of GDP. That's our debt. Am I doing it right? Then we are at yeah, and then in 2019, we went to 94.26, and then we went up in 2020, because I guess because of the pandemic, to 109.6% of GDP. Then we talk about 2021, and we went to 94.2, and then 2022, we went to 77.09% of GDP. I don't know how that happens, right? But that seems to be, I hope, I hope this is not true, because it seems to me to be quite interesting. From 94% to 77%, really a huge gap. And then we have 2023, it is 72 point, it was at the time, 72.34%. And for 2024, the goal is to have it at 68.4%. In 2025, 65.2% of GDP. 2026, 61.67, 2027, 58.52, and in 2028, 55.04%. So that is where, as Jamaica, this is the reality as far as Jamaica's debt is concerned. We know that in 2011, 2012, we were standing at 145% of GDP. And we went down so quickly, right, by 2008. From 2013 at 145% of GDP to 2018 at 94.39%. That is a huge turnaround. But this is only about macroeconomic stability. It's not talking about what is happening at the microeconomic level. And what is happening is that we're going to be seeing these macroeconomic development, and we're not going to see any development in the lives of the people, nor the basic infrastructures that we need in the country. And nobody's talking about it. The professors at the University of the West Indies, they're just going along with what the IMF neocolonial, neoliberal model, are suggesting that they follow. Right? It's all about neocolonialism and neoliberalism. That is the doctrinaire policies that Jamaica is following, and or academic elites are not resisting those sort of neo-slavery approach to modern development, right? So it's something you need to think about. Now, we're going to look now at the US's. I think now this is the US's, debt, national debt, talking about the national debt in the United States in relation to gross domestic product, that's GDP, from 2018 to 2021, with a forecast to 2028. Now, we see in 2018 that the United States was standing at 174.44%, right? In 2019, 108.75%. Now, while this time, the IMF, which is controlled by the US primarily, was scolding Jamaica for reducing its debt, while the debt in the United States is augmenting, right? That is what is I just want to give you that perspective, that this country that you think is the exemplar of democracy and the rule of law. And if you have a country that is just being indebted and its debt is growing, you know that it is marching, it's on its road to tyranny, to slavery. Because no indebted country that seeks to keep, accruing debt is going to result in prosperity or is on a route of economic prosperity. It is going to fall. And we are seeing that happening as we speak. Now, 2020, it was at 133.5% of GDP. That was 2020 when we had the pandemic, right? 2021, 126.42% of GDP. And in 2022, 121.31% of GDP. And it goes on. And you can see in 2028, it is going to be at 137.49% of GDP. Right? This is the United States of America as far as its debt is concerned. For those of you who can see it on the screen, this is it. Right? This is the United States of America as regards its debt to GDP ratio. And people are not talking about this. So we have the IMF preaching about austerity and the importance of reducing our debt, reducing Jamaican debt, but they're not talking about the importance of reducing American debt. Yeah, and America might, yes, control the global forces right now, but it's not a guarantee that she will always do that for the rest of her life. And this is what we have to understand. And some of us, we tend to think and we can't look beyond what we're seeing today. Because this debt by the US is unsustainable. It is unsustainable. And it's time for us to think. And the moment the country begins to tanker, the economy begins to tanker, then you're going to have all of the social problems afflicting Jamaica, afflicting America, and perhaps worse. But we're not talking about that. We tend to be still looking to the US as the example of what we should be. Maybe we can take something from its constitution. Yes, we can. And the ideals that it should stand for, that it is not standing for. Yes, we can do that. But we cannot cite the United States and the embassy down there as being the exemplars of rule and order and democracy, because it is not, and people around the world know that. It doesn't mean, therefore, that we can't heed the warnings in terms of, yes, we know that we have a problem with crime and violence. And one of the things that I don't like about Jamaica and our leaders is that we wait until the United States pronounces an advisory to acknowledge that we have a problem. We ourselves do not like to acknowledge our own problems and try to develop solutions to solving those problems. We wait until the so-called white man issues a warning, and then we begin to act as slaves. Oh yeah, we need to fix our rooms. We need to put our rooms together, right? So where is our sense of independence? Where is our sense of autonomy if we have to depend on US advisories to be able to do something or to be able to solve our own problems? We knew that that was going at an alarming pace, you know, before the IMF knocked on our doors. We knew that. But because of the high levels of corruption, and by the way, the corruption is not only controlled by Jamaicans, it's an international, it's a global situation. And these elites, be they Jamaican elites, Asian elites, American elites, Spanish elites, they are all interconnected. And they have joined forces against us, the normal citizens. And we've got to understand that. So when you say Jamaica is corrupt and Jamaica is this and Jamaica is that, which Jamaica are you talking about? When you talk about America, which America are you talking about? Because as far as we are concerned, the American citizens, the average American citizen understands that the country is not being run in their favor. And we tend to look at the superficial. Jamaicans tend to look at the superficial and think that, yes, they see some tall buildings up over there and some nice cars on the road, and we think that all is well with people there, but all is not well. Because we fail to read, we fail to examine things more critically. And I have been saying on this channel that our conversation is very narrow. And it's time for people to wake up and to elevate the conversation and not to have the conversation, not to build our conversation as if to suggest that Jamaica is an 100%, 100% independent sovereign nation, because it is not. It operates in a global community where global forces run the show. And the US is at the helm of those global forces. Now, interestingly, we tend to look also at the whole concept of the opposition and the two political parties that we have there in Jamaica. And we tend to see them in light of, which one is going to be doing that and which one is better than the other. But, both of them are controlled by the same global forces and domestic forces. And they're not going to change things, and Ian Boyne wrote an article, and this article was written from 2012, April 29th, 2012, in the Jamaica Gleaner. And the title of his article was Preparing for Bitter Medicine. That's when we were going to the IMF. Or going back to the IMF in 2012. He says, no one expects finance minister, that was the then finance minister, Peter Phillips, and his team will be coming back from Washington with any good news. The best we can hope for is that they were able to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund for a little dilution of the bitter medicine, or at least some adjustment to the dosage. Now, one of the things that I've always looked at and is very evident in Jamaica is that we tend to, as the years progress, we do not move on. Our nation does not move on. So even though this article was written in 2012, it's almost like it's being written today. It's the same thing, because it's the same policies, it's the same problems, and nothing is being improved upon, even though we're told that this macroeconomic development that has, is of great success in Jamaica. The finance minister has already been dropping hints that cuts and trying times are coming in the budget. And Education Minister Ronnie Thwaites told the country the past week that there's going to be no new money for education available in the budget. And he later went to Ocherias to tell private schools, sorry, we can't help you. Now, this is under the PNP government. This is a PNP government that you think is socialist. And I think people are still viewing the PNP as a socialist party. It is not. The Cold War ended years ago. And I did do a video on this channel in which I showed you that your boy, Michael Manley, the one who everybody is claiming to have been the most progressive Prime Minister of Jamaica, of modern Jamaica, right? He became also a doctrinaire free marketeer, a free market fundamentalist when he took over the reins of power in 1989. And he opened up the Jamaican market. He liberalized the country. All right. So from one end of the economic spectrum to the other, he was a socialist, and then he went to being a baptized, a converted free market fundamentalist. And if you study the whole the free market fundamentalism, it is a religion. So when I use the word baptized, it can be used in a literal sense, because he was a baptized member or pretended to be one. Maybe he was baptized, but he wasn't truly converted, because we know that he also did afterwards, before his death, he did some interviews in which he stated on the documentary Life and Death that the IMF was, and these institutions were not helping Jamaica to move forward, and that they were anti-progressive policies. So perhaps Manley was not a converted free market fundamentalist, but he was baptized thus, right? He didn't continue to stand up for his socialist doctrines. Why? Because the Cold War had by that time ended. The Soviet Union had fallen, and we have to move with the times. I hear people talking about Michael Manley and Norman Manley, and we are not living in the times of Michael and Norman Manley. And let me just, let's look at this before I move on. The opposition should have its opportunity to crow and grandstand soon. They won't have to seek publicity then, as the media will be flocking them for second bites and juicy copy once the budget is presented. So this is what we are seeing all the time. There is something, let me continue to read. And yet, what if we, in our 50th year, which was on 2012, surprise ourselves by resisting the temptation to indulge in partisan point scoring? That's exactly what we do in Jamaica. Everything is based on our partisan perspective. What if we postponed the gratification of gloating over the People's National Party's challenges and prepared ourselves for what is necessary and inescapable if we are to grow this economy? This is the question that Warren is posing. But he says here, and I want to read this to you and for you to understand. The local private sector and foreign investors can perceive no economic policy difference between the former JLP regime and the present one. The IMF, I am sure, is finding the PNP willing to make the same commitments with the JLP government made, and expressing the same concerns about effects on social policy. Indeed, some are saying that Andrew Holness was naive and too open and honest with the Jamaican people in promising more bitter medicine rather than offering them pie in the sky promises. But fundamentally, if it is Mark Golding or it's going to be Andrew Holness, the fundamentals will not change. And I think that Andrew Hilton on Jeffery Tavares' Necro Talk podcast last night said that he was quite forthright in declaring that whether Andrew Holness wins the election or it's Mark Golding, the fundamentals in Jamaica will not change. right? But one of the things I do not like about these politicians, they tend to talk a lot about history. And nothing is wrong because history is important, and history, as you know, is my thing. Love history. But what I do love to do is to learn from the lessons of history and to apply the lessons of history to our present world. Oftentimes, we still remain in Jamaica's discussion, we still remain in the 1960s and 1970s as if we're living in those times, and as if the world has not changed and moved on, and the global context and the global events have not changed. Right? We have not adapted ourselves to the changes in the world economy. Right? We have not yet done that. And we still do not know how to do that. And that is also another problem Jamaica is facing. The education has not helped us to think differently and to meet the challenges that confront us in the age in which we find ourselves. Right? So you had Andrew Hilton last night talking about Norman Manley and how he wrote a constitution and he had done his job, right, by giving us political independence. But, you know, that is what is said. But is that true? Is it true that Norman Manley wrote a constitution that really gave us independence or provided for us the tools of independence? It is not true, right? Because as we understand, the Constitution in Jamaica, it is a recycled document that was written by the colonial masters, right? Even your boy at Harvard University, Orlando Patterson, knows that. And that is one of the reasons he left Jamaica, because he realized that our politicians were hypocrites. He himself, that is Orlando Patterson, said that when he got funds through his engineering, right, and his assistance, Jamaica was able to get some help from the World Bank to in the 1960s, probably early 1970s, to help with its social programs, right? And he says it's the same PNP, a lot of them who, the most loud mouths, as he said, the ones who were very loudmouth, right, who declared that they were for equality and they were for uplifting the poor, are the same ones who betrayed him, Orlando Patterson, and transferred the funds into other areas, which did not do the job that it was slated to do. Right? So we have to be careful of these politicians telling us, or purporting themselves, touting themselves to be what they are not. Right? As Orlando Patterson would have learned in the early 1970s or the late 1960s. Right? We've got to move away from this just recounting of a history that is just narrow and in many cases abstract, has nothing to do with what is happening right now in the world, and a lot of which also are things that are myths that need to be corrected. But I understand that, you know, Andrew Hilton is just a victim of our education system. Sounds very well, speaks very well, articulates himself extremely well, right? But he does not have an understanding of what is happening in the global community, or pretends not to have one. So let's listen to him, Andrew Hilton, as he speaks on the Jeffery Tavares Met We Talk show, right? So let me share my screen with you, and you will listen to a conversation with Jeffery, not Jeffery, but Andrew Hilton. So let me take this out and you will hear. Please listen.
Question, Sir Hilton. Today was nomination day.
Yes.
And Take off your political hat and put on the Andre Hilton hat of Jamaican. Not a member of the People's National Party or a former minister or a former MP, but a Jamaican. Where do you see Jamaica going?
Well, in relation to nomination day or general?
No, forget about the nomination day. I don't say nomination day. In relation to the entire country, where is she going under this shebang that is going on?
Well, let me just say categorically, one of the real challenges we have found ourselves in as a country, and it's my personal opinion, is the lack of understanding of governance by our leaders in recent times. Look here, running a country is no ordinary job. When I reflect on someone like a Norman Manley, who was adept to what a country should be because of his history. Mother was white, father was black. His father was a businessman. He was a radical, started behaving himself, got educated. He came from the bowels of the people, but yet was exposed to opportunities. And he had a thinking and a level, a depth of understanding of what a country ought to be. And he did his best, and I would classify Norman Manley as the architect of the Jamaican society. But when you go further, Buster, in his own right, being a flamboyant, charismatic leader, he probably never had sufficient depth to have delivered what he could have delivered in his time. If you look at the other leaders, Michael Manley, I think, learned quietly at his father's feet, understood the struggles of Black people in Jamaica, understood being in the fields with the sugar workers. He understood the belly of the pains of the people, and he was able to deliver lots of relief to them. And you move on to Siaga, which, if you're to be honest, while Siaga has had some negatives, he probably, in the entire gamut of JLP leaders, was the best we have had in terms of a JLP leader that delivered the kind of policies and services to uplift the masses of the country. And before I go any further, I want to say, Jeffrey, and I know this is a long run-up, but if you're going to run a country like Jamaica, it's not like England, it's not like America, it's a country that the majority of people was, and certainly our ancestors were enslaved, kicked off the plantation without land, without education, and without self-esteem. So any government that is going to run this country, center of that entire leadership must be that great masses who was disenfranchised. And you may say, boy, slavery done long time, but the remnants of slavery is still with us. We're still have a great, large percentage of our people who are landless, not educated, and certainly lacking in self-esteem. When you move on from Siaga, you have a
Okay,
PJ Pants. Look at
so
PJ Pants.
we
PJ was campaigning.
we see what this guy has said. That's Andre Hilton. Now, again, great recounting of the history of Jamaica. But the fact of the matter is that he also is, sticking to the myths, right? And to think that Norman Manley was this great architect of independence, when we understand that the British weren't able to carry us on their shoulder anymore. And whether or not Norman Manley wanted independence or Bustamante, they had to. Another point that he mentioned was the fact that, we still have remnants of slavery, which we still do. And Jamaica, by far, a greater deal of the remnant of slavery. You cannot walk from corner to corner in Jamaica and not see, it's obvious that we were a former enslaved and colonized nation. The way how we speak, the way how we deal with each other, the anger that is built up within us, and thus the state of decadence and the lack of basic infrastructure on the island. It is evident, it is obvious. But what I hear will hasten to say, Andrew Hilton, is that the politicians are the new guards of the colonial masters. And he's not saying that instead of having a governor that ruled in the interest of Britain, what we're now seeing are our current crop of politicians ruling in the interest of the global elites, particularly those to the global north. Right? And we've got to take stock and to see that, you know, Orlando Patterson also mentioned that, you know, Jamaica was by far was an absentee plantation colony. Right? So most of these slave masters did not reside in Jamaica. It wasn't a settler nation as Barbados was, and the United States to a greater extent. Right? Barbados was more of a settler colony in which the slave masters lived. So because they lived there, they developed the infrastructure so that they could live there. Right? Jamaica, on the other hand, it's alleged that a lot, the topography, the environment, I'm not sure what, but many of the slave masters died while living in Jamaica. So many of them, you know, thought that it was not the best thing to do. And, you know, then afterwards they had imported so many African slaves that they probably feared for their lives living among so many Black people, living among so many slaves who they knew could attack them at any given moment. So the best thing to do was to rule from Britain and to have a, you know, slave drivers and a governor who was there to send back, to repatriate, to expatriate rather their monies to them. And that's the same thing happening in Jamaica right now. That our politicians are, you know, they're physically there, but, you know, their monies are not there. Right? It's the same absentee situation. And our economic elites also, their monies are stacked away in tax havens. So how are we going to develop? And how are we going to just cast the blame on the system of slavery, on the institution of slavery? Yes, we could, in the sense that we have continued that system of slavery on the island and colonialism on the island. It's what we call neo-slavery and neo-colonialism. It's colonialism and slavery in a new name and with different guards. Now we have the mulatto and the Black class in Jamaica functioning in the capacities as our neo-colonial masters, the economic, what I call the political economic elites that run the show along with the global forces. Right? And this is what the people like Andre Hilton is not talking about. He also mentioned a point in which he stated that, you know, we were a former colony of slaves and all of that nonsense. But so was Barbados, and a lot of the other Caribbean islands were largely slave colonies. And I'm not saying they're doing excellently. I'm not saying now that they are paradises, but they're doing much better than we are doing. How do you explain that, Andre Hilton? We tend just to talk, you know, every talking point that I hear in Jamaica is, I grew up hearing these talking points. Nothing really has changed, particularly by these academics. They talk the same nonsense over and over again and repeat the same myths over and over again. And that is what I'm saying to you, Wilfred Rattigan and Jeffery Tavares, that you've got to elevate the conversation beyond just, identifying corruption, because yes, corruption is a major part of society, but we also have to look at the socio-historical and socio-political factors and perspectives that create this monster of corruption. Right? We've got to do that. We can't just think that taking out the Minister of Foreign Affairs or taking out Andrew Holness or Mark Golding is going to solve the problem, because it is not going to solve the problem. It is a system of corruption. And how do we upend this system of corruption? It's almost like slavery. Slavery could not have ended by just removing one slave master or removing the governor of Jamaica. It's a system that had to be uprooted from the ground. If you take out the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the the Jamaican ambassador to the United States, all you're doing is just removing some of the stems from the tree. But we need to uproot the tree of corruption, the tree of slavery, the tree of colonialism, if we want to create a new Jamaica. We've got to do that. Right? Other than that, we're just talking. Right? And people are just following. But nothing or no fundamental change will ever happen. Right? So we need to be aware of that. Now, let's look at there is an article here that was written about the American century. And for those of you, I don't know if you knew that, this document was written by a guy called Henry Luce, right? And he had predicted right there from 1941 that the United States would have been the new empire of the world. And from then, they were preparing for that change of guard, because the British Empire was the empire that was ruling the world, right? Well, at the time, but now America had by then, was replacing them, was about to replace them. So in 1941, the influential publisher, Henry Luce, declared the Century American, the United States' new role was to redefine the world order. And this mission relied not only upon military power, but also upon prestige and culture. To a large extent, this universal America was shaped by historical and geographical construction of the Atlantic. Right? Now, the phrase came to history by way of journalism, specifically from the title of a 1941 article by the owner of the Time Life magazines, Henry Luce. The century he described, the 20th, was already underway when he named it, yet his article was primarily but conditionally predictive. We are faced, he says, with great decisions. The first of those was to declare the American century. So since the 20th century rather, we have been living in the American century, not the British century. We're living in Pax Americana. We had Pax Romana, now we have Pax Americana, the American century. And notice the word Pax is peace, and as they have been declaring it to be, because peace on their terms, not on what the terms of peace should be. Now, let's look at something here, America's varied missions. A material emphasis, however, does not suffice to justify Luce's definition. What else could the phrase mean? Was the American century in that American defined it for the rest of the world, starting with the Atlantic region, or was it an era for America, according to Americans? Luce's definition suggested both meanings, right? So he meant that America was going to run the show, run the way how the world operates, right? His century was both an imperial one, featuring a Pax Americana and an apotheosis of American progress, based not only upon the extent of American power, but, and arguably more so, upon the achievement and lore of its culture and beyond the Atlantic, as stated in one of the essay's most quoted passages. Let me read the quotation that he has here. Once we cease to distract ourselves with lifeless arguments about isolationism, we shall be amazed to discover that there is already an immense American internationalism. American jazz, Hollywood movies, American slang, American machines, and patented products, or in fact, the only things that every community in the world from Zanzibar to Hamburg recognizes in common. Blindly, unintentionally, accidentally, and really in spite of ourselves, we are already a world power in all the trivial ways, in very human ways. So from then, America was on a quest for full spectrum dominance, right? And she runs the world. She runs the show. She runs Kingston and whatever happens in Jamaica. And I heard Jeffery Tavares on one of his programs saying that the US Embassy in Jamaica, in Kingston, was suggesting that Jamaicans, have a right, it's within their hands to deal with corruption. It's almost that the US is going to help Jamaica in solving the problem of corruption. But as we saw in the articles from ABC News website and also from The Hill, 76% of Americans believe that their country is not heading into the right direction. I want to also end here with their perception of what corruption is in America, right? And this is from Al Jazeera, right? And it says here, corruption is as American as apple pie. You know what apple pie means to Americans, right? So that is what the article here is suggesting, that corruption is as American, that it's deeply embedded in the DNA as apple pie, as their desire for apple pie is. So there is a reason, the article says here, why so many US officials get away with apparent bribery and graft, right? And this was written by Belen Fernandez from Al Jazeera, and she's an Al Jazeera columnist, right? Let's just read a few sentences, a few paragraphs and stop. On September 22, influential United States Senator Bob Menendez was indicted on corruption charges along with his wife, Nadine. It is the second time Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has faced such charges. As per the indictment from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, Menendez and his wife received hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes from 3 New Jersey businessmen in the form of gold, cash, and luxury vehicle and assorted other goodies. In exchange, the Democrat from New Jersey allegedly used his position of power to benefit the 3 businessmen as well as the government of Egypt, the home country of one of the men in question. Listen to what this says now. As the old saying goes, power tends to corrupt. According to US mythology, of course, corruption is entirely the business of other, less civilized countries like or nations like Jamaica, particularly enemies of the United States that lack the proper commitment to democracy, the rule of law, and all that nice and noble stuff. But as the article here suggests, it is a mythology. It is a myth, right? The United States is perhaps more corrupt than Jamaica is because it is the de facto empire of the world. And empires have to be corrupt. Empires cannot be democracy, right? Empires are dictatorship. Ratigan and Jeffery Tavares. So both of you reside in an empire, right? You reside in an empire. And it is not desirous of enhancing, of building Jamaica's democracy or building democratic institutions in Jamaica. It is not. That too is a myth that you both have to unlearn. I had to unlearn it years ago. Years ago, I had to unlearn that myth. Maybe sometimes in 2003, right? And you're not going to learn that or begin to unlearn that in schools. You're going to unlearn that through independent reading and also assessment. To read for yourselves, to think independently. Because what we have today is this collective understanding of the world. This collectivism that is generally a characteristic of totalitarian societies, where independent thought and independent reasoning are not encouraged in those societies. And if you think independently, what is the agenda? What is his agenda? He's crazy. He's reserved. He or she is not normal because you think outside of the box. And this out of the box reasoning and understanding and thinking were critical components of US history. And that is why Americans achieved so much and at a rapid pace. But what we're seeing there today and around the world is this collectivist understanding of the world, which when it is looked at carefully, all we're seeing are myths beneath the surface. Myths beneath the surface. It is time for Jamaicans and these podcasters to elevate the conversation. The conversation needs to be elevated. Of course, we're here talking and having good conversations because there is a dearth of journalism, of good journalism in Jamaica. Right? The Gleaner, the Observer, they're not doing the job that they should be doing. Right? The talk show hosts in Jamaica are not able, are constrained from doing the jobs that they could or should be doing because of the economic, the financial corporations that restrict that right for them to do what they need to do. Right? So the politicians and the global elites can do anything they want to do. But then in our narrow discussions, we just look at the politicians. But we don't look often at the people, at the forces, the domestic as well as global forces that control these politicians. Right? So I appeal to Ratigan and to Jeffery, Tavares, and all the Jamaican podcasters. Some of you are doing a fantastic job. And this is what we need. The more voices we have out there, right? It's the more that we perhaps will bring some amount of change. But change can only happen if it is rooted. That's positive changes, that is, because we can have also negative changes, right? But positive changes can only happen, can only take place if our conversations, if our discourses are rooted in truth. Because remember, the truth is the truth. The truth cannot change. The truth is built on principles and not on partisan ideologies. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you in another conversation. All the best to you. Happy Friday. Bye.